I think the one thing that there's a few things that I've picked up from critique partnering as well as reviewing and also writing my own stories, and it's kind of throwing me through a loop a little bit. And I think there are just certain elements that are really forcing me or making me really stop and sit back and sit and draw up new story grids for the stories that I'm writing right now, because I don't want to go too far off from the path, if that makes sense. I don't know. There are certain elements of my stories that I just kind of need to sit and work on, which is why I don't feel confident enough yet to sit and do a video discussing what my stories are or sharing them with the public and sort of saying, hey, check out my first chapter and blah, 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 because I'm at that point where I'm beating myself up, but I'm being productive about it, because I want to be able to write a really good story. I think it will take me like 2 minutes to sit and come up with the most important aspects of my story. And those are the kind of areas that I'm constantly reworking and working on because I want my story to be really good. And at the same time, with my critique partnering, even though it's the first project that I've ever done as a critique partner, there is so much promise with the story that I'm working on right now that I really want to be able to give some of these pointers to my friend and say, these are the aspects that you need to focus on too. But it's a good story, and so are my stories. They're really good. But I don't know. Let me think. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about what the most important points are for myself. Challenges that I'm going to be setting for myself that I also kind of assume that other writers will probably have for themselves as well as sort of like general pointers for the writing craft in general. Anyway, the 3 main points, there is a 4th one, but the 3 main points for me are setting, plot, characterization. The 4th one I will touch on in a little while, but just briefly, I'll just go through those 3 points and why I find them so incredibly important as far as writing novels especially is concerned. Setting, briefly defined, is what helps to establish location, context, and sometimes, not in all cases, but in some cases, the historical context of the story that you're writing and or reading. It helps to put the reader alongside the main character or the villain or whoever you happen to be writing about in that particular moment. The setting also helps to put into play what is happening with the plot. For example, with the hero's journey in most adventure or hero kind of stories, the hero is usually transplanted from their comforts of home life or comforts of wherever they have always been for a very long amount of time before you then get into the story, before you actually are introduced to the protagonist, to somewhere completely new. Oh my gosh, it's a new place. How are we going to sort of express and transcribe what the character is feeling in this new setting and such and so forth? So setting is very, very, very important. However, what a lot of writers tend to do is they do not balance out setting and world building with other contextual references needed for the plot 50-50 alongside characterization. Characterization is more of a minute thing when it comes to detailing the characters, especially the protagonist and the antagonist, or the protagonist and maybe their secondary characters and 3rd level characters. Characterization is it's very similar in the sense that you're throwing in or trying to express sometimes exaggeratively the characters' personal beliefs, morals, what they look like, what they're doing, what they choose to do as far as the plot is concerned. it's those kind of minute details that you need to kind of put into the plot that help drive the plot along. So setting and characterization, for me, setting is like the big thing and then characterization is like the minute thing, but you need them to work hand in hand. Like I said, a lot of writers do sometimes sort of throw maybe 60-70% into setting, and then only 40 or 30% into characterization, because it completely depends on what kind of story they're trying to write. For example, space operas and things like that, absolutely love them. The characterization and setting is still very, very close to one another. They're not exactly 50-50. It might be 55-45, because you've got the aspect of space as one massive like element of the story, of the plot. Then you've also got to factor in the spaceships that they might be using for transport, and then you can also have characterization thrown in there as well. One series, modern series anyway, that I absolutely love is the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. If you have never really been into sci-fi or anything like that, I would highly recommend checking out the books as well as the TV series over on Amazon Prime. But those are absolutely fantastic examples. The book series is a fantastic example of how characterization and setting are almost 50-50 with each other, if not more so into the characters. The only reason why I know this is a really good example as well, because I did briefly mention it, they do have the TV adaptation available on Prime. So the fact that they were able to, like the writers were able to work with the writers for the TV series, they were able to translate perfectly so many aspects from the novel series right through to the TV series. So perhaps when you're writing your own novels, maybe you could do the same thing. Consider sometimes when you're writing scenes or writing dialogue or anything like that, you can imagine, how could I write this sequence in such a way that if it were to be adapted into a movie or a TV show, it would make it a little bit more easier to convey the ideas that I want for the plot in that way. I kind of blanked out halfway through that sentence and I don't remember how it started. So that for me is one of my main things. I think that's also a really big reason as to why I don't yet feel confident enough to show off chapters or scenes or sequences on my website or on my blog or anything like that, or share them with friends. Like, I'm too scared because I know that I'm not yet at the level that I would consider to be competent or confident enough or adept enough to be able to do that. I mean, I have shown scenes and sequences, like really early ones, to friends in the past, and they were completely blown away by what I'd read. And I don't know whether that's because we were friends and they were just being really nice or whatever, but that is one area that I do beat myself up on. But I'm very critical but positive about when I beat myself up about those particular things, because I want my story to be I want it to be a fun read. I want it to be easy to understand. And I also kind of want, again, it's going to sound really kind of pretentious or kind of like over the top for me to say this, but I wouldn't mind the idea of being able to adapt it into another genre, another medium, TV, stage, whatever. So I like the idea that I'm sort of spending time playing around with my story in order to make sure that I can try and get it to be as best as it can be at this point in my journey, my writing journey thus far. So those are the two main ones that I have out of those three. So setting and characterization that always work in tandem with one another, but they also work in tandem with the bigger picture, which is the plot. The plot is the most important aspect. And I know there are people out there who were like, oh, I'm a pantser, I do everything on a whim. And it's like, it's so easy for me. That's totally fine if that's the case for you. But I am not one of those people. I'm someone who needs to have a certain aspect of control over various areas of my life, and scheduling is one of my biggest loves. One of my biggest favorite things to do every day. I like to write a list of what I'm going to be doing. I like to set calendar notifications for things I need to do in future. I like to plan. I like to go in there with some ideas, but I'm very flexible to the idea of also not knowing what's going to happen, especially when it comes to writing. So a lot of the chapters that I've planned out, all I've basically stated are the very basic things that I need to make sure I get covered in each chapter. And then I just go ham. And when I go ham writing those particular scenes, then it all just kind of flows out of me quite naturally, the same way as it flows when I am planning something. Sorry, calendar notification. Oh, see, I just got a notification about a tweet that I need to reply to. Because I know I'm going to forget. It's terrible. But that's what I do with plotting. Another big thing with plotting that I love to do is story gridding. I will show you in just a moment what a story grid is, like super quickly. But this is J.K. Rowling's story grid. You'll have to Google it and then you can sort of see a better one. And for those of you who like to listen to writing podcasts, I would highly recommend checking out the Story Grid podcast and going back and listening to like the first, like the sort of the early episodes rather than the newer ones, because there's like a whole trajectory along the journey of the main writer's writing journey. So go back to like the earlier ones and you can actually hear a lot of information about editing and how important it is to actually have a good plot idea kind of set out, but at the same time being completely flexible to the fact that things will change, especially if you work with editors and you want to get traditionally published. In general, if you're able to find some examples of like those like line graph things, I'll insert a picture here, which basically just details how a story is supposed to run on like across a line, like there's like ups and downs throughout the entire manuscript. What you should be able to do is split your story up into acts. So you've got the beginning, the middle, and the end, but also including the climax. You should be able to draw a line very similar to the picture here. That should give you an idea of how your story is supposed to be structured and set out. You should be going from low, 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 all the way up as it kind of climbs its way up the climax ladder. And then you should have some sort of lovely resolve. You're supposed to build and build and build and build towards something. And then it's all supposed to just kind of like hit the wall. And then there's going to be a resolve afterwards. You need to be able to draw that kind of a line with your story. If you find that you're able to have like the low start at the beginning of your plot and it kind of goes up a little bit and then it just kind of goes back down again and it kind of just stays low, there's a whole area there, and it's usually around the middle build, there's a whole area there that you need to start tweaking, editing and working on. And then once you've managed to get your story back on that sort of trajectory, then you can focus on formatting and all the other stuff later on. So plot is a very, very important aspect. As much as people want to say that they're pantsers and they can just do everything willy-nilly and it's all good, that's great. But there are those of us out there who do struggle with that. If you happen to have learning disabilities and things like that, it might actually be kind of handy to sit and write up, draw up a story grid and then actually split your story into various acts and then discuss very briefly what's happening in each scene in each act, because in that way it will keep you on track as well. So this is one of my writing journals. I have many for different stories. But this is basically how I draw like the very basic structure of my story grid. So you have like all these individual squares that kind of go through that map out the entire plot of the story. And then down the side, I will have the acts numbered. So from the very beginning, the middle building up to the climax, and then the last act, which will be all to do with the sequences and scenes to do with the resolve. And then across the top here, I'll have scenes or chapters, depending on how long the story is going to be. But I'll have like a rough explanation in here of what I want at least the first 5 chapters to be able to entail as the story goes along. I'll give you an example, but I won't spend too much time on it because I don't want people looking. But who cares? So scene 1, scene 2, scene 3. So this is like more of like a chapter sort of like sequence as it goes along. And then I've got act 1 all the way down to act 5. So my book would have been split into 5 parts, but it wouldn't have been indicated as such. And then I have like important scenes for the main character in red throughout the entire story, and then with the other character in green dotted throughout. So this is how many chapters ideally I would want for this particular story. So that's just an example of a story grid and how important it is. So what you should try and do with your own story, if it's not too difficult, you'll know immediately if it is. Sit and draw up your own story grid. If you don't want to do it on a grid, at least make a whole list of like all the stuff under Act 1, all the stuff under Act 2, and such and so forth. And then that way it will throw out to you what plot holes you might have, what issues you might have with the plot, characterization, setting, and whatnot. And you can go into as much detail as you want or as little detail as you want. Oh, one more thing with plot. And this is just the writing in general. I would like to try my hand at perhaps traditionally publishing my One Wood Witches series, which again, in another video, I will discuss what that whole series is about. I would like to try my hand at that. I want to give myself maybe a year once I've completed all 3 books. This is before I actually meet an editor and all the rest of it. I want to try and give myself a year to edit it, make it so much better than it is right now, and then trying to pitch it as a potentially traditional book to be published. That is the plan. I don't think, I know for a fact at this stage, there's no way in high heaven, there's no way in hell that someone's going to turn around and go, oh my God, I will pick this up and ship it to various people who I work with, blah, blah, blah. Because I wouldn't feel confident. I would feel absolutely horrible if I were to pitch the manuscript that I have right now as it is. This is why it's taking me so long, because I want it to be as good as possible, or at least get it to be as great as possible. But at the same time, I don't know, there's just a lot to think about. But the one main aspect, going back to the point I was trying to make, was the very first chapter. I know that prologues are something that a lot of editors and agents don't particularly like, but I do have a prologue in my book so far. It was there, then I got rid of it, then I brought it back, then I edited it, then I got rid of it, then I kind of integrated it into chapter 1, but it didn't really make sense, and stuff like that. I need to be able to hook the agent as well as my readers from the first page and in the first chapter. If I cannot hook my readers on that first page, I don't expect anybody to want to read beyond that point. So that's a really important aspect of plot as well. You need to hook those people in from the start. I know a lot of writers, again, will probably say, no, it's not that important, blah, blah, blah. But if you want to be traditionally published, especially with like the big publishing houses, there are rules and stipulations that they want each and every submission to follow, and you need to hunt on those websites to find those submissions and rules and then submit. Because if your formatting is the way that the publishing houses want them to be, and you followed the rules as far as like basic plot structure and hooking people on the first page, like from the get-go, they will read beyond that first page. Otherwise, if it's not set out correctly and it doesn't make sense, and then they start reading and realize this book is going to be incredibly boring, they won't even let you know that it's terrible. They'll just throw it straight in the trash. You won't hear from them. So as much, like I said, as much as people want to say that they're pantsers, there are certain rules and stipulations that you still have to follow by, even if you don't follow by them right in the beginning and you do the right thing, which is just sit down, just write, and then worry about all that stuff at the end. Either way you do it, it's still part of plotting. You're not necessarily doing it all by yourself, but don't see it as like some sort of way to punish yourself as you write. Writing is hard enough as it is. So go with the flow, be flexible, but at the same time, don't beat yourself up with no end or no way to change the problems that you're having. Be flexible, be open to that sort of stuff, and take your time. It's fine. The world is not going anywhere. So this was supposed to be more of like a journal for me. And it is mostly about me and my thoughts. It's not like a factual thing. This is just merely me and my opinion. So I could be completely wrong at this point, but at the same time, I'm just journaling it because a year from now, who knows, maybe my thoughts will be completely different because I'm teaching myself all of this. But yeah, I just thought I would throw in those particular pointers. I think that's everything. The fourth point was supposed to be formatting, but I briefly mentioned it already. So yeah, those are my 3 things. Plot, or rather setting, characterization, plot, and then formatting. Those are like the four main things I'm going to be focusing on anyway. So, yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to go. I'm going to just get back to like critiquing and like doing some writing on the side as well. So I'm busy today.